25 fancy fashions from 1970s Britain that failed miserably, and we're about to uncover every spectacular disaster. Britain led the world in fashion innovation during the 70s, when London's streets became catwalks for the most audacious style experiments ever witnessed. We pushed boundaries, broke rules, and created looks so outrageous they'd make today's influencers blush with embarrassment. Here's the mind-blowing truth. Every single trend sent people to hospital, caused actual traffic accidents, or was eventually banned by law. These disasters reveal the uncomfortable truth about British culture and our desperate desire to escape strikes, power cuts, and 3-day weeks through increasingly dangerous clothing choices. Let's start with a feather cut, a commitment to 45 minutes daily with a hairdryer and enough Silvercrin hairspray to damage the ozone layer. British hairdressers charged £3.50 for razor-cutting hair into dozens of layers that supposedly fell naturally into wings. British weather and feathered hair existed in fundamental opposition. One gust of wind or 5 minutes of drizzle collapsed your carefully constructed wings into a damp, stringy mess. Inspired by Farrah Fawcett's California look, it became a sodden disaster in Manchester rain. By 1981, the feather cut had vanished, replaced by practical short styles that didn't require industrial quantities of products. Between 1976 and 1979, thousands of British teenagers decided hardware from their mother's sewing basket made excellent facial accessories. The punk movement, centered around King's Road shops like SEX, promoted safety pins as the ultimate anti-fashion statement. The Bromley contingent, including young Susie Sue, pioneered piercing cheeks, ears and eyebrows with common safety pins. The medical consequences were grim: infections, scarring, and documented cases of blood poisoning requiring hospitalization. These pins weren't sterilized, weren't designed for human flesh, and caught on clothing, pulled unexpectedly, or opened mid-conversation. By 1980, even dedicated punks had quietly removed their pins, though they'd never admit it was the constant pain. Butterfly collars so enormous they could cause aviation incidents appeared on shirts from 1972 onwards. These collars spread across the chest like actual wings, measuring 8 to 9 inches from point to point. Burton's and John Collier sold millions to British men who somehow convinced themselves this looked sophisticated. The collars caught in car doors, dipped into soup at lunch, and collected rain like guttering. They blocked peripheral vision, meaning you literally couldn't see people standing beside you. Kipper ties, those absurdly wide neckties, were specifically designed to work with these monster collars. By 1979, collar sizes had retreated rapidly, and wearing butterfly collars marked you as hopelessly outdated. Before we descend further, here's what's coming. The trouser style so wide it caused actual traffic accidents, the shoes that sent thousands to hospital, and the fabric so flammable it was eventually banned by law. Subscribe so you don't miss out on videos like this. British men wore more makeup in the mid-70s than at any time before or since. Glam-rock made glitter, eyeshadow and lipstick acceptable for straight men, something remarkable in rigidly masculine culture. Major retailers like Boots created entire men's cosmetics ranges. The problem was, British blokes had no idea how to apply makeup, leading to comical results. Men caked on foundation in wrong shades, creating infamous orange faces, or applied glitter so heavily they'd find specks in their eyebrows weeks later. After 3 pints in smoky conditions, makeup would run, smudge, or slide off in sheets. By 1980, men's makeup counters had vanished from high street shops. The jumpsuit represents the decade's most ambitious fashion failure, a one-piece garment promising convenience but delivering logistical nightmares. British manufacturers produced jumpsuits for everyone in fabrics resembling nothing found in nature. The fundamental problem nobody discussed was toilets. Using public conveniences required essentially undressing completely, and in British facilities rarely having hooks. Your garment touched floors, you wouldn't walk on barefoot. Women had it worse, as most zipped up the back, requiring genuine athleticism to remove and replace without assistance. Many used polyester that didn't breathe, creating mobile saunas. By 1979, jumpsuits had retreated to mechanics' overalls and children's sleepwear, having comprehensively failed as fashion. The Afghan coat represents hippie idealism, questionable hygiene, and truly terrible judgment. These sheepskin coats with wool inside and leather outside, decorated with embroidery, flooded British shops from 1968 but peaked around 1973 to 74. In British conditions, they became mobile Petri dishes. The fundamental issue was smell. When wet, which was frequently, Afghan coats gave off an odour combining wet dog, old cheese and regret. The sheepskin retained moisture for days, intensifying to weapons-grade levels. Buses and trains were often overwhelmed by collective damp Afghan coat smell, a uniquely 70s torture. By 1980, they'd become symbols of everything embarrassing about early 70s counterculture, and thousands ended up in skips. The halter neck top was marketed as sexy and liberating, but delivered impracticality and discomfort equally. These tops tied around the neck, leaving backs and shoulders bare, becoming enormously popular from 1974 onwards, despite being fundamentally unsuited to British climate. The design flaw was the necktie bore the entire garment's weight, creating pressure that after hours would leave marks and cause genuine pain. Women reported headaches and neck strain, but fashion magazines insisted they were comfortable. Most halter tops couldn't be worn with bras or required expensive, uncomfortable halter neck bras. Britain's climate made backless tops impractical except for 3 annual summer days. By 1981, halter tops were relegated to holiday wear. Oxford bags, the widest trousers in fashion history, measured up to 38 inches around the hem. The style originated in 1920s Oxford University but was revived mid-70s. British tailors produced millions between 1975 and 1977. The practical problems were immediate and dangerous. Oxford bags got caught in escalators, leading to serious injuries in London Underground stations and resulting in warning signs specifically mentioning wide trousers. They dragged on the ground, collecting mud and debris. Walking in high winds was genuinely hazardous, as wide legs would catch air like sails, pushing you off balance. Several documented cases exist of people being blown into traffic. By 1979, you couldn't give them away. Few fashions better illustrate the gap between fashion magazine fantasy and British reality than hot pants, those extremely short shorts supposedly revolutionising women's fashion. Introduced around 1970 to 71, they were marketed as sophisticated alternatives to miniskirts. The reality in Britain was immediate hypothermia. Hot pants were designed for American climates but made no sense in a country experiencing all 4 seasons in one afternoon. British women gamely attempted wearing hot pants throughout the early 70s, often pairing them with knee-high boots in futile attempts to retain body heat. Workplaces were completely unprepared with arbitrary management decisions. By 1974, hot pants had essentially disappeared from British fashion. If hot pants were too short, maxi skirts were comically too long, sweeping the ground and collecting everything unfortunate along the way. These ankle-length skirts became popular around 1969 to 70 and persisted through much of the decade despite being monumentally impractical for British conditions. The fundamental problem was length interacting with British weather and infrastructure. Maxi skirts absorbed water from puddles and rain until they weighed several pounds more than when dry. Walking through British streets meant your skirt collected cigarette butts, dust, mud, and occasionally worse things. Public transport was particularly challenging, requiring hiking up skirts or carefully managing yards of fabric. By 1978, maxi skirts had retreated to evening wear. We're halfway through our journey, and if you're thinking these fashions couldn't possibly get more ridiculous, hold on tight! Coming up, I'm revealing the trouser style literally banned by factories for being safety hazards, the fabric that sent people to hospital with severe burns, and the shoe trend that changed British health and safety legislation. Give us a like. gauchos represent the decade's strangest fashion experiments. Calf-length culottes, supposedly combining trouser freedom with skirt femininity, but actually delivering neither benefit. These wide-legged split skirts took their name from South American cowboys, which should have been the first warning sign they'd fail in Scunthorpe. British shops sold gauchos heavily between 1974 and 1976. The length was the killer problem. Hitting mid-calf, gauchos were too short to be elegant, but too long to be practical. This awkward length made legs look shorter and created strange proportions, flattering virtually nobody. British weather was particularly unkind. Rain would soak the fabric, which being mid-calf length would then slap wetly against your legs. By 1977, gauchos had retreated to charity shops. Flared jeans deserve separate discussion because while both were wide at the bottom, flared jeans represented something more insidious, a fashion that started sensible and descended into madness. Flared jeans appeared around 1969 with modest flares of a few inches, practical and flattering. But by mid-70s, flares had grown to proportions making ship's bells look conservative. By 1975 to 76, flares measuring 24 inches around the hem were common. The practical problems mirrored Oxford bags but were worse because denim is heavy when wet. Walking through puddles meant flares would wick water upward through capillary action, eventually soaking you to the thigh. Flares also collected in bike chains. By 1979, flares were genuinely embarrassing. Platform shoes are the single most dangerous fashion item the 70s produced. These shoes, with soles ranging from 2 to 6 inches in height, sent thousands of British people to hospital accident and emergency departments throughout the decade, creating a genuine public health concern that medical professionals repeatedly warned about. Walking in serious platforms required learning a new gait, and most people never quite managed it, resulting in an entire generation stumbling around like toddlers. Stairs became genuine hazards, ankles were twisted, legs were broken, and several people suffered serious injuries from falls. What's remarkable is how platform shoes spread across all social classes and subcultures. By 1980, platforms had retreated to fancy dress. If platforms were dangerous, clogs were dangerous and uncomfortable, combining the worst aspects of traditional footwear with modern fashion stupidity. These wooden-soled shoes, inspired by Dutch and Swedish workwear, became fashionable in Britain around 1973 to 74, marketed as natural and authentic alternatives to synthetic fashion. The reality was blisters, splinters, and a distinctive clumping sound announcing your approach from 50 yards away. British manufacturers produced millions of clogs with completely inflexible wooden soles. The lack of flexibility meant your feet couldn't move naturally, causing strain on ankles and calves. The wooden soles had no grip, making them lethal on wet pavements. They were incredibly noisy, creating problems in offices and libraries. By 1976, clogs had failed commercially. Midi skirts represent fashion's most catastrophic miscalculation. The attempt to find middle ground between mini and maxi that satisfied absolutely nobody. These skirts, hitting awkwardly mid-calf, became briefly popular around 1970 to 1971, when fashion industry titans decided women needed a sensible length. British retailers stocked millions, convinced this compromise would appeal to both conservative and fashionable women. The midi was universally unflattering, making legs appear shorter and creating proportions that worked on precisely nobody, regardless of height or build. The length collected dirt and water like maxi skirts, but without the elegant sweep, whilst being too long for practical movement. Fashion magazines desperately promoted midis, but British women staged what amounted to a fashion rebellion, refusing to buy them. The midi's failure was so complete and rapid that within 18 months, retailers were slashing prices to pennies, having badly misjudged what women actually wanted to wear. The leisure suit concept crossed the Atlantic from America, but Britain took it in a uniquely terrible direction. Terry cloth versions that looked like someone had tailored a towel into formal wear. These suits, popular briefly between 1974 and 1976, were marketed as casual alternatives to traditional suits, perfect for the modern man wanting to look smart without formalities constraints. The terrycloth version specifically appealed to British ideas about practicality. It was washable, comfortable, and absorbed spills. What it actually created was fashion catastrophe. Terrycloth has no place in structured garments. It bags, stretches and sags, creating suits that look tired within hours. The texture attracted lint and debris like a magnet. The glam-rock bouffant required genuine engineering skills. Men backcombed their hair into gravity-defying towers, adding 6 to 8 inches to their height. David Bowie, Mark Bolan, and Gary Glitter made this iconic, though achieving it required materials that would stock a hardware shop. These bouffants were heavy, pulling at your scalp all day, and the hairspray created a helmet-like crust that cracked when you moved. They were remarkably flammable, a genuine hazard when everyone smoked everywhere. Several unfortunate incidents where stage lighting met over-lacquered hair created tabloid news stories. When punk declared war on glam's excesses in 1978, these bouffants became symbols of pretension. They disappeared overnight, though you'd occasionally spot tragic holdouts at provincial discos into 1982. Cheesecloth, that lightweight, loosely woven cotton fabric that's actually designed for straining liquids, became a fashion material in the 70s with predictable results. British retailers sold cheesecloth shirts, dresses, skirts, and even trousers between roughly 1971 and 1976, marketing them as natural, comfortable alternatives to synthetic fabrics. The reality was clothing so transparent it required multiple layers, so delicate it tore if you looked at it wrong, and so prone to shrinking that garments could lose 30% of their size after one wash. The transparency issue was particularly problematic in British climate, where the grey light would silhouette anything underneath your cheesecloth garment. The fabric also aged terribly, fading quickly and developing holes apparently spontaneously. The kipper tie deserves its own entry because while wide ties existed before, the kipper tie took width to levels that bordered on architectural. These ties, measuring 5 to 6 inches across at the widest point, were worn throughout the 70s with those massive butterfly collars, creating ensembles where your entire chest became a fabric exhibition. British tie manufacturers sold millions of kipper ties, often in patterns that included those same abstract prints, paisleys and geometric designs that appeared on shirts, just slightly larger and more overwhelming. The practical problem was weight. A kipper tie used 2 to 3 times more fabric than a normal tie, creating accessories that pulled at your collar all day. By 1979, tie widths had retreated rapidly. We end our journey with Crimplene and polyester, the fabrics that defined 70s Britain more than any other. Crimplene was a thick polyester knit that promised to be crease-resistant, easy care and durable, qualities that appealed enormously to British housewives tired of ironing cotton and wool. Between 1970 and 1978, Crimplene dominated British clothing. The problem was that Crimplene and polyester generally were fundamentally unsuited to human wear. The fabrics didn't breathe, creating clothing that trapped heat and moisture. They retained odours with remarkable tenacity. The fabrics developed shine through normal wear. More seriously, polyester and Crimplene were highly flammable, and several tragic deaths occurred from clothing fires. By 1980, Crimplene had become shorthand for everything wrong with 70s fashion. 25 fancy fashions from 1970s Britain that failed miserably, and we're about to uncover every spectacular disaster.